Okay, so in the CCEA 2017 onward specification, paper 2, you will have 1 hour and 45 minutes to complete both sections. Section A is writing, and it is one task marked out of 88 marks, and it's recommended that you spend 55 minutes on this section. Section A is going to be either creative writing or personal writing. You get a choice. The personal writing will be a question, the creative will be a stimulus picture. 30 marks are available, regardless of whichever one you choose, for your spelling, punctuation, grammar, etc., etc. And then for the actual content is the other 58 marks, okay? For things like, your language devices, your tone, how well you engage and hook the reader, etc. Section B, there are 3 tasks marked out of 62 marks in total, and it's recommended that you spend 50 minutes on this section. Task 2, aka the first question on section B, is going to be a compare and contrast piece of on 2 literary texts, so 2 extracts from 2 different novels. Possibly linked somehow in terms of maybe the atmosphere, the mood, the setting, maybe the genre. Okay, and then tasks 3 and 4, aka questions 2 and 3 on section B, are going to be from a piece of non-fiction, and it's going to be something along the lines of how the author entertains or amuses or has some sort of lively and engaging style. You should really pay attention to the suggested times, usually shown at the beginning of each task, because they will enable you to complete all the tasks within the time limit and make sure that you're not wasting time on certain sections and then running out of time for the entire paper. The figures in brackets printed down the right hand side of the pages indicate the marks awarded on each task, and examiners can only credit what they read. So if you're the person with the really messy handwriting, you are going to need to try to the best of your abilities to make it legible. Now, this I have just taken as a screenshot from the sample assessment materials available on the CCEA website, and completing those in your own time as some sort of practice piece before the real thing will greatly help you, even if you've already done it as some sort of mock in school. So section B, reading literary and non-fiction texts. Additional answer pages are available at the back of the paper should you require it, and for texts A and B, the literary texts for task 2, they only give you about 1 A4 page, and remember it's not quite a full A4 page because the margins are kind of funny in those exam booklets. I recommend that in 26 minutes you should be able to use that and then request more paper as well. It's recommended that you spend 26 minutes on this paper, and I will create some sort of different video for the non-fiction texts piece, so don't worry about that for the time being. This one is solely focusing on the literary texts and the comparison question that you will be asked. So again, I have just screenshotted this from the sample assessment materials, and I have also made some past paper questions, and if you're in my class, you should have access to those via our Google Classroom. So please do avail of those. I've modelled most of them on the sample assessment materials because I reckon it's going to be very, very similar to this. The first few years of specifications, generally, the exam board tend not to deviate too far away from that because teachers and students will be using it as some sort of guideline. So the 2 extracts, which I have not included, the question it's asking you is how both texts have created a sense of unease, and obviously you're expected to use point, evidence, explain. This is an evaluative or analytical task, and it tests your ability to read and indeed read between the lines. Kind of like some of those higher mark questions on maybe Key Stage 3 comprehensions. However, it's a higher order thinking skill, again, because it's asking you to not just analyse writers' choices and why they possibly may have made those choices, but also consider how that is similar or different from another piece of writing as well. So to successfully compare and contrast, you should really signpost for the examiner that you are doing that. You could say things like, text A uses simile to suggest blah blah blah, but That's not going to get you marks if you then don't compare or contrast to text B. Don't just talk about the two texts as if they are separate texts that you are churning out point evidence explain chains on. You need to make sure that you're actually signposting for the examiner really obviously that you are considering the similarities and differences. So things like similarly, both, common to both is, also, a shared feature is, likewise, and then to contrast. In contrast, whereas, however, contrastingly, on the other hand, unlike, etc., etc. I'm sure you can think of tons more as well. This is not an exhaustive list. Next up is a sample past paper question that I have made. You won't find it on the CCEA website, but you can screen grab it if you want, or if you're in my class, you'll hopefully already have a copy of this. And it's from The Hobbit and Aragon, because I thought that, well, they both contain this concept of dragons, so how have they portrayed the dragons? I don't actually think you'll get a question like this. It's most likely to be this sense of unease, or something to do with setting, or mood, or atmosphere. Maybe even tension or suspense. I think that that's more likely what they will do. However, we'll look at the Aragon and Hobbit piece as some sort of sample to help show you the kinds of things you should be looking for. Now, you'll be given instructions like read the two literary texts below. They are both part of the fantasy genre and are aimed at a teenage readership. Read the extract from Tolkien's The Hobbit. In this extract, Bilbo has managed to creep into the dragon Smaug's lair. And then it gives you the extract, and then it tells you read the extract from Christopher Paolini's Aragon. In this extract, Aragon observes the dragon move clumsily around his room. And your main focus is how they present both of the dragons, okay? Is it in a similar way? Is it different? Etc., etc. There are 32 marks available for this section. So really the fact that they give you a page, I think that they're expecting most people to request more paper and go over that page limit, because 32 marks for only a page worth of analysis isn't really that much. So aim for more. Aim for at least a page and a half. Now, the things that you probably should be looking out for when you read something like this are... So you might want to get some easy marks by talking about the narrative point of view. For example, is it first person and therefore maybe more immersive? Or is it maybe the omniscient, mysterious, third person narrative point of view? You might also want to talk briefly about the plot line. You might want to talk about the tense. Is it past tense or is it present tense, which creates maybe more urgency? Then you could talk about structure, you could talk about paragraphing. Look out for things like short paragraphs juxtaposed with longer ones. Look out for the single sentence paragraph. Look out for something like the single word sentence for maximum effect. Look out for different sentence structures. So obviously your main ones, your simple, compound and complex. Generally, short sentences, possibly change the pace, or they are there for dramatic effect. Obviously, every single extract is completely different, so you can't just make claims like that and hope that it's right. You have to evaluate if this is actually the case in this extract. Generally, longer ones add more detail, or it could be making a really strong point. If you are a part of my English class and you read the Long Way Home and The New Recruit, or indeed if you read the I Am Number 4 compared to the Lie Tree extract, you'll notice that in I Am Number 4, the really long rambling sentence is to convey just how fast paced it is and how much action there is. Generally, lots of short sentences close together really change the pace. It could speed it up, it could slow it down, and you really need to be considering what is it doing in this scenario and try to read it aloud with the voice in your head, so to speak. Also look at punctuation. Is there maybe use of an ellipsis? Is there use of parenthesis or your brackets to create some sort of aside? Is there a semicolon, a colon, exclamation, rhetorical question? And also look for maybe endings as well as openings. So, is there a special way that it opens that possibly hooks the reader? Is there possibly a cliffhanger to encourage you to read on to the next chapter? Then you might want to break it up in terms of things like imagery. So, simile, metaphor, personification. Maybe there's lots of death imagery depending on the extract. Maybe there's grotesque imagery like we saw in our Macbeth coursework. And then maybe group similar techniques together, as you can see I'm trying to do here. So maybe have one on sound, so alliteration, onomatopoeia, any kind of oral imagery that's created. Maybe you want to group things like repetition or rule of three or rhetorical question or dialogue together. So try to group them together in similar paragraphs. There's nothing wrong with doing it chronologically, so looking at the first paragraph of one extract and then the first paragraph of the next extract, but you might run out of time, so you might prefer to do it via technique and group the similar techniques together. At least that's what I would do. This isn't exhaustive, the stuff I have here. There's tons of other ways to compare, and there's also tons of other things to look out for. So closer to your exams, I will make sure that I make you guys a little cheat sheet type sheet where it has common things that the extract might have. It's not a guarantee that it will have it, but it might just help you in terms of reading through and speeding up if you're actually hunting for certain techniques. Now I'm going to read the extracts aloud after all that rambling. So first of all, we've got the Hobbit. There he lay, a vast red golden dragon, fast asleep. Thrumming came from his jaws and nostrils and wisps of smoke. But his fires were low in slumber. Beneath him, under all his limbs and his huge coiled tail, and about him on all sides, stretching away across the unseen floors, lay countless piles of precious things, gold wrought and unwrought gems and jewels, and silver red stained in the ruddy light. Smaug lay, with wings folded like an immeasurable bat, turned partly on one side, so that the hobbit could see his underparts and his long pale belly crusted with gems and fragments of gold from his long lying on his costly bed. Behind him, where the walls were nearest, could dimly be seen coats of mail, helms, and axes, swords and spears hanging, and there in rows stood great jars and vessels, filled with a wealth that could not be guessed. To say that Bilbo's breath was taken away is no description at all. There are no words left to express his staggerment. Since men changed the language that they had learned of elves in the days when all the world was wonderful, Bilbo had heard tell and sing of dragon hordes before, but the splendour, the lust, the glory of such treasure had never yet come home to him. His heart was filled and pierced with enchantment and with the desire of dwarves, and he gazed motionless, almost forgetting the frightful guardian, at the gold beyond price and count. He gazed for what seemed an age, before drawn, almost against his will, he stole from the shadow of the doorway, across the floor, to the nearest edge of the mounds of treasure. Above him the sleeping dragon lay, a dire menace even in his sleep. He grasped a great two-handled cup, as heavy as he could carry, and cast one fearful eye upwards. Smaug stirred a wing, opened a claw. The rumble of his snoring changed its note. And then we have the Polini extract. The dragon was no longer than his forearm, yet it was dignified and noble. Its scales were a sapphire blue, the same colour as the stone, but not a stone, he realised, an egg. A deep sapphire blue, sorry. The dragon fanned its wings. They were what had made it appear so contorted. The wings were several times longer than its body and ribbed with thin fingers of bone that extended from the wing's front edge, forming a line of widely spaced talons. The dragon's head was roughly triangular. Two diminutive white fangs curved down out of its upper jaw. They looked very sharp. Its claws were also white, like polished ivory, and slightly serrated on the inside curve. A line of small spikes ran down the creature's spine, from the base of its head to the tip of its tail. A hollow where its neck and shoulders joined created a larger than normal gap between the spikes. Aragon shifted slightly and the dragon's head snapped around. Hard, ice blue eyes fixed on him. He kept very still. It might be a formidable enemy if it decided to attack. The dragon lost interest in Aragon and awkwardly explored the room, squealing as it bumped into a wall or furniture. With a flutter of wings, it leapt onto the bed and crawled to his pillow, squeaking, its mouth open pitifully like a young bird's, displaying rows of pointed teeth. Aragon sat cautiously on the end of the bed. The dragon smelled his hand, nibbled his sleeve. He pulled his arm back. A smile tugged at Aragon's lips as he looked at the small creature. Tentatively, he reached out with his right hand and touched its flank. Now, in the exam, you will not have lots of time to annotate your texts really fully and thoroughly as we have been doing in class. So you're going to need to pick up the technique and practice the technique of hunting for things quickly and being expedient with your time. So as you read through the first time, and if you need to reread a second time, do so, but try to keep as much of those 26 minutes they recommend to actually writing as possible. So as you read through the first time, I would have a highlighter. It's your exam paper, so you're more than welcome to draw all over it if you need to. And I wouldn't necessarily write down loads of techniques, but anything that's really leaping out at me, and you don't have to spot everything, anything that's really leaping out at me, I would highlight or underline or circle. Okay? So if you see a really interesting metaphor or a root of three, and then you happen to spot it in the second extract, underline it so that you're aware that this is a shared technique that the authors have. Remember that authors can choose to use similar techniques but for different effects, or different techniques for the same effect. So try to work in phrases like that. Okay? Text 1 does X to convey whatever. Text Y likewise uses X, however it is to convey blah 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 instead. Okay, and now I will show you my sample analysis, which is a little bit too long and probably goes into far too much detail, but it's just to show you the range of things that you could perhaps observe. I have actually chosen to do this in a chronological order, but be aware that that might mean that you're missing out on certain things. And oh, sorry, before I forget, you might also want to point out that there are things such as tone as well, or maybe it's how it creates suspense, or maybe you want to talk about atmosphere or mood before we move on. The first paragraph of the Hobbit extract sets the scene and creates an overall sense of the dragon. Adjectives vast, red, golden help accentuate the size of the dragon, and the colour paints an image of it as menacing yet regal. Red has connotations of death and blood, emphasising the potential danger of the dragon for the main protagonist Bilbo. Gold has connotations of wealth and emphasises the lore of dragons hoarding gold. The combination of these adjectives accumulates to present an image of the dragon as physically strong. Similarly, Paulini uses the first paragraph of Aragon to set the scene and create an overall sense of the dragon. However, this time the description focuses on how small the dragon is. This is shown in no longer than his forearm, which shows that this dragon is much younger and is only a young hatchling. Despite its size, it is presented as noble, similar to Smaug. And look at the fact that I'm really driving home for the examiner the fact that I'm using these techniques, that I am comparing, I am evaluating. This is achieved through the accumulative adjectives dignified and noble, which present the dragon as powerful, despite its small stature. Contrasting to the Hobbit, in Aragon, the dragon is presented as being a deep sapphire blue. Rather than being associated with violence, death, and danger, this connects the dragon further with wealth and rarity. The parallel to precious gems emphasises how precious the dragon is, how it is something unique. So I'm comparing, I'm contrasting, but I'm also really making it obvious that I am evaluating both texts as well, that I'm analysing the impact that they are meant to have separately, as well as considering how they're similar and different. Tolkien uses onomatopoeia in "thrumming came from his jaws and nostrils" to create a sensory image of the dragon. orally recreating the sound. The verb choice insinuates Smaug's power and further depicts him as dangerous. Contrastingly, the dragon in Aragon is described as having fanned its wings, suggesting that this is a nimble, delicate, and graceful movement, further heightening the reader's awareness of its small size and vulnerability. Now, I have said things like Tolkien and Polini. You, first of all, don't constantly have to use the names. If they're really long, like they were with The Long Way Home, you can shorten them to some sort of acronym. Or you can just simply decide that The Hobbit is going to be text A and Aragon is going to be text B. Now, these actually are quite short extract titles, so they work quite well saying the whole thing because it's not actually wasting lots of your time. However, if it is a really long rambling book title, shorten it to an acronym. So I might change Hobbit to H, or I might change Aragon to E. And as long as I let the examiner know what this code is, that's completely fine. Or you could have it text A and text B. Note how I have not just hunted for certain techniques. So it's not a technique hunt, I'm actually explaining. So I'm using my point, evidence, explain, and I'm constantly considering the impact of these techniques. I'm not just blindly stating that it's there. I'm evaluating why it has been chosen to be placed there as well. In the second paragraph, we are led to the precise details of the ominous and large characteristics of Smaug. Tolkien describes the huge coiled tail. The adjectives huge and coiled helps the reader visualise the sheer power of the dragon, and throwing in little comments that depict the impact it's supposed to have on the reader are further going to just add that extra touch of finesse to your writing and impress the examiner. The quotation, all sides stretching away across the unseen floors, which again emphasises the size of the dragon, as the dragon's presence is leaving the floors unseen and covers over it. Similarly, the first paragraph of Aragon gives us precise details as to the dragon depicted. Its wings make it look contorted, which conjures up an image not of its power, but of how it is spindly looking, as it is not fully grown, so fragile, weak. Its wings are being described as being several times longer than its body. The author's choice of comparative helps to emphasise the potential power of the dragon. However, despite this potential power, the newly hatched dragon is uncomfortable and not sure how to position itself. The author furthers this description through the adjectival description, thin fingers of bone that extended from the wing's front edge. The adjective thin emphasises the frailty of the dragon and present it as something delicate. The personification, fingers of bone, make it seem more like a human than creature, which presents it as intelligent. So you can see that because my focus is the dragons, I'm constantly evaluating the dragon as a character. Okay, I'm also getting some really good analysis out of basic techniques like adjectives. You don't always have to go for the really highbrow technique like personification. You can get some really good analysis out of things as simple as adjectives, adverbs, nouns, and verbs. In The Hobbit, the author mentions the many precious gems that then follows it with the silver red stained in the ruddy light to evoke the great ordeal and sacrifice that had to be made to attain these gems. aka the dragon is bloodthirsty and they enjoy killing. Okay, hence the phrase allows us to visualise the greed and evil of Smaug. The ruddy light accentuates the colour red and connotes blood and death, depicting him as malevolent, as evil, destructive, violent. Take your pick of adjectives. In the next paragraph, we are redirected to the size of Smaug. The author mentions that Smaug has wings of an immeasurable bat. There are two things to notice in this case. One is immeasurable, where the author makes a brilliant use of diction to emphasise the vast size of Smaug, presenting him as intimidating. And the second is bat, as bats have connotations of evil and are dark, ominous creatures. They also operate under the cover of darkness, suggesting there's an aura of sneakiness and again danger. Similarly, in Aragon, the dragon is presented as being potentially dangerous, and I'm constantly figuring out how they're similar, how they're different. Polini achieves this through specific noun choice, talons, which depicts the dragon as predatory and conjures to mind sharp nails or claws like a bird of prey. The writer further uses repetition in white fangs, and its claws were also white to suggest the dragon has the potential for danger. However, the connotations of colour suggest that it is innocent. The simile, like polished ivory, suggests the dragon is precious and rare. And sibilance, slightly serrated, further connotes the potential that the dragon has for danger. It has the potential to be ominous and imposing, because you think serrated, you think of like a knife's edge being serrated. Tolkien similarly uses imagery of rarity, but this time it is to connote the greed and corruption of the dragon. So you can see me comparing how they use similar techniques, but for a different effect. Smaug's belly is crusted with gems and fragments of gold, which has two connotations, that he is royal and omnipotent, and avaristic, so filled with greed. In the fourth paragraph, we are still opened to the description of Smaug, and the author's purpose is still left clear. In the fourth paragraph, the author no longer stays in the description of Smaug, but rather its surroundings to further emphasise the qualities. The author firstly mentions the walls can dimly be seen, and sorry, I've got a typo there, and the fact that the walls are only dimly seen first insinuates the dragon's size hinders the main character Bilbo Baggins from seeing the wall, and it sets a dark, sinister atmosphere, and a rather, I suppose, ominous atmosphere, showing the surroundings are obliterated to nothing. The items attached to the wall further enforce the idea that this is very dangerous. There's coats of mail, helms, axes, swords, and spears. These weapons suggest that Smaug is dangerous, and the implication is that he has actually killed quite a lot of soldiers and keeps the weapons as some sort of token. Contrastingly, in the second paragraph of Eragon, the writer moves on to the description of the dragon's movements. The dragon's head snapped around when the protagonist moves. The verb choice suggests that the dragon has excellent senses and reflexes, reacting quickly to potential danger. He then follows this up with a short dramatic sentence, "He kept very still," to emphasise Eragon's fear of the dragon being dangerous. This is reiterated through the description of formidable enemy. The protagonist's feelings are further shown through the adjectival description, hard, ice-blue eyes fixed on him, which suggests that the dragon's gaze is penetrating and intimidating. However, despite its potential danger, we are reminded that unlike Smaug, the dragon is young. In paragraph 3, the dragon is presented as clumsy, achieved through the adverb awkwardly, and the verb squealing and bumped. The dragon's movements are uncoordinated, presents it as fragile. Tolkien uses hyperbole in "There are no words left to express his staggerment," which emphasises the ostentatious extent of Smaug's greed, enough to shock Bilbo. Contrastingly, Paulini uses verb choices like flutter to suggest that Eragon recognises the delicate movements of the baby dragon. Furthermore, verbs like crawled and the onomatopoeic verb squeaking reinforce its vulnerability. Any presentation of the dragon as dangerous is now suspended, as the reader is reminded of just how frail it really is, achieved through the emotive language mouth open pitifully and the simile like a young bird's. These paint a pathetic picture of just how needy the dragon is and how vulnerable it would be without proper care. Verbs smelled and nibbled evoke a sense of the tiny, delicate movements of the dragon and create the impression that it has decided to trust Eragon, suggesting that the dragon is possibly playful or curious. And in the final paragraph, Bilbo's fear is emphasised. Above him, the sleeping dragon lay, a dire menace even in his sleep. This is furthered through Bilbo cast one fearful eye upwards, portending to future disaster. Finally, the rumble of his snoring changed note suggests that Smaug has woken up and hints at the potential danger that Bilbo is now in. Contrastingly, in the final paragraph, Eragon's curiosity and pathos for the dragon is emphasised. A smile tugged at Eragon's lips as he looked at the small creature. However, his trepidation or nervousness is still present, as shown through the adverb tentatively, emphasising his hesitation or uncertainty. Now, that's pretty good going to get something like that done inside the 26 minutes that you have. I have chosen maybe some slightly more sophisticated vocabulary than is really necessary, and I also think that that's a much more it's a much tougher question than you're probably likely to get. You'll probably get something along the lines of unease, suspense, tension, or setting, in which case you're looking out for things like lots of short dramatic sentences to build suspense and change the pace. You're looking for things like onomatopoeia to further create a sense of unease. You're looking for verbs that convey the danger that the main character is in, or adverbs that help convey danger. So make a little list of things that you even think could possibly come up, and things that you should hunt for to cut that time that you're using to analyse and read through in half that little bit. Please make sure that you're not making really vague claims that could be said about any text, like alliteration is catchy. The examiner will not credit things like that. You need to be more specific to the text. Also make sure that you're actually evaluating the technique properly and not just claiming something completely ridiculous that isn't the case. So if those short sentences used to slow the pace down, don't say that it's speeding it up. Genuinely think about it and figure out, what is this technique trying to do? And good luck in the real thing and also your mocks. Hopefully you actually use these videos to help you further understand the subject at your own pace.